Picture this. You wake up, you don't shower, you don't brush your teeth, you've never heard of deodorant, and you've been wearing the same animal hide for... Actually, you don't even know how long, because you don't have a calendar either. Welcome to being a human roughly 40,000 years ago. Now here's the question that's going to ruin your next trip to a crowded subway car. Did these people smell as bad as you're imagining right now? Or is that just modern snobbery talking? Stick around, because the answer is weirder, and honestly kind of more disgusting than you think. Let's start with the obvious. Humans are mammals, and mammals smell. That's not an insult, that's biology. We've got two main types of sweat glands. Eccrine glands, which are mostly water and salt, and are spread all over your body to cool you down. And apocrine glands, which are the real troublemakers, packed into your armpits and groin, pumping out a thick, fatty, protein-rich sweat that, on its own, is actually almost odorless. The smell doesn't come from the sweat itself. It comes from bacteria on your skin eating that sweat and excreting waste products as a thank you gift. Yes, body odor is quite literally bacteria poop. Sit with that for a second. So right away, we know ancient humans had the exact same glands, the exact same bacteria-friendly skin, and the exact same biological plumbing we do. Evolution didn't suddenly install apocrine glands in the last few thousand years because Egyptians complained about it. These systems go back to our primate ancestors, which means, on a purely mechanical level, a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer sweating after chasing a bison for 6 miles was producing odor molecules in basically the same chemical family as the guy next to you on a hot bus today. The hardware hasn't changed. What has changed, and changed dramatically, is everything around the hardware. The hygiene habits, the clothing, the diet, the bacteria living on the skin, and crucially, our modern, hypersensitive, soap-trained noses. That last point is sneaky important, so let's actually unpack it because it's going to come up again and again in this video. Your sense of what counts as smelling bad is not some universal law of nature. It's a cultural setting, like a thermostat. And it's been adjusted by literally thousands of years of soap commercials, perfume industries, and your mom telling you to shower before dinner. Anthropologists who study smell, and yes, that is a real and fascinating field, point out that what one culture considers a foul stench, another considers neutral, or even pleasant. There are still hunter-gatherer and pastoralist communities today where body odor isn't treated as some shameful secret to be erased, it's just a smell a person has, the same way you have a face. So before we even get to did ancient people smell bad, we have to ask, bad according to whom? Now, with that disclaimer locked in, let's get into the actual lifestyle, because there's a lot going on here. First up, hygiene. Did ancient humans wash? The popular image is some grease-caked caveman who's never seen water in his life, but that's mostly Hollywood nonsense. Humans have almost certainly been bathing in rivers, lakes, and rain for as long as we've existed because, well, water feels nice, and you don't need a degree in microbiology to notice that. Archaeologists have found evidence of deliberate bathing rituals stretching back thousands of years. The ancient Indus Valley civilization built what's basically one of the earliest known public bathing complexes, the so-called Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, dated to around 4,500 years ago, with careful waterproofing and drainage. That's not a society that's chill with stink. That's a society engineering infrastructure specifically to get clean. Go a little further back and you get cultures that loved oils, not soap exactly, but oils and fats rubbed on the skin, sometimes scented with herbs or resins, partly for hygiene, partly for sun protection, partly because, let's be honest, it probably felt good and made you smell less like a goat. Ancient Egyptians were notoriously big on this. They used natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture, mixed with oils, basically an early soap-adjacent cleanser, and they were famous in the ancient world for caring about personal grooming, shaving body hair, using perfumed oils, the whole deal. So if you got transported back to ancient Egypt, expecting a stink fest, you'd actually be walking into a society that was arguably more obsessed with smelling nice than a lot of people today. But here's where it gets interesting because hygiene wasn't uniform across history or geography. Go to medieval Europe, and you get a much messier picture. Pun absolutely intended. There's this persistent myth that medieval Europeans never bathed at all, which isn't quite true, but bathing culture did take some serious hits during certain periods, partly due to religious attitudes that linked public bathhouses with sin and disease, especially after outbreaks of plague got blamed, incorrectly, on water opening up your pores and letting sickness in. So for a while, the prevailing medical advice was basically, don't bathe, it'll kill you. Instead, people relied on dry washing, rubbing the body with cloth, changing linen undergarments frequently, since linen was believed to absorb sweat and dirt away from the skin, which honestly isn't a terrible idea even if the bathing avoidance part was based on bad science. So already we've got massive variation. Some ancient and historical cultures were aggressively into bathing and perfume. Others went through stretches of actively avoiding water on purpose. Meaning the question, did ancient humans smell bad, doesn't have one single answer, it has dozens, depending on which ancient humans, where, and when you're talking about. Now let's talk clothing, because this might be the bigger smell culprit than skin itself. Modern clothes get washed in machines with detergents specifically engineered to strip oils and kill bacteria. Ancient humans did not have Tide Pods. Clothing made from animal hides, wool, or early plant fibers was harder to clean, took longer to dry, and in many climates simply couldn't be washed often without risking damage or, freezing to death while it dried. That means body oils, sweat residue, smoke from cooking fires, and yes, bacteria, would build up in clothing over time in a way that's almost unimaginable to someone who just throws their shirt in the wash after one wear. And speaking of smoke, this one's huge, and people forget about it constantly. For most of human history, fire wasn't just for cooking, it was your heating, your light source, your protection from predators, sometimes your literal home decor. Which means ancient humans, especially in colder climates, were spending enormous amounts of time in smoky, enclosed spaces. Their hair, skin, and clothing would have been saturated with wood smoke pretty much constantly. Now here's the twist. Is that actually a bad smell? Plenty of people today love the smell of a campfire. Smoke has antibacterial properties too, so in a weird way, being smoke saturated might have actually helped mask or even suppress some of that bacterial body odor. Ancient humans may have walked around smelling less like unwashed primate and more like permanent barbecue, which, fight me, sounds kind of nice. Diet is another massive factor, and this is where things get genuinely fascinating from a science angle. What you eat directly changes the chemical composition of your sweat, your breath, and honestly your gut bacteria too. Research has shown that diets high in red meat tend to produce sweat that other people in blind smell tests rate as more unpleasant compared to people eating more plant-based diets. There's a well-known study where researchers had men eat either a meat-heavy or vegetarian diet for 2 weeks, collected their sweat on pads, and had women rate the samples. The vegetarian sweat samples were consistently rated as more pleasant, more attractive, and less intense. So if you've got a population of ancient humans who are heavily reliant on hunted meat, especially in colder regions where plant food was scarce, there's a real chemical case that, yeah, they might have had a stronger, gamier body odor than a population subsisting mostly on foraged plants, grains, and fish. Garlic and certain spices do something similar, releasing sulfur compounds that get metabolized and literally come out through your pores, not just your breath. So depending on regional diet, ancient populations could have smelled distinctly different from each other. Not just ancient versus modern, but ancient Mongolian herder versus ancient Pacific Islander versus ancient North African farmer, each with their own diet-driven signature scent profile. In a sense, body odor might have functioned almost like a regional fingerprint long before anyone had the concept of cologne brands. Now, let's bring in the skin bacteria angle properly, because this is genuinely one of the coolest parts of the story. Your body odor isn't really you, it's a collaboration between you and trillions of microorganisms living on your skin, called your skin microbiome. Different bacterial species produce different smelly byproducts. Some are more associated with that classic sour, oniony armpit smell, others with a more musky or even slightly sweet aroma. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. And here's the kicker. Your skin microbiome is shaped by your environment, your hygiene habits, your genetics, and yes, your exposure to soap and antibacterial products. Modern hygiene culture is essentially an ongoing microbiome demolition project. Antibacterial soaps, antiperspirants packed with aluminum compounds that physically block your sweat glands, daily showers stripping your skin's natural oil layer, all of this constantly resets and disrupts your skin's bacterial ecosystem. Ancient humans bathing far less frequently and with no antibacterial products whatsoever would have developed a much more stable, mature, long-term skin microbiome. And research into skin bacteria has actually found something kind of mind-blowing. More frequent washing doesn't necessarily mean less odor in the long run, because you're constantly disrupting and resetting your bacterial colonies, which can sometimes let more aggressive, smellier bacterial species move in and recolonize before a balanced ecosystem stabilizes. There's even been research into specific bacterial strains, like certain Staphylococcus species, that produce far less of the classic bad odor compound compared to others, suggesting that some people's natural, undisturbed microbiomes might just smell better by default, almost like a genetic lottery ticket. So here's a genuinely wild possibility. Ancient humans with their stable, undisturbed, generations-deep skin microbiomes might have actually had a more consistent, possibly even milder baseline body odor in certain contexts than someone today who showers daily, uses 3 different scented products, and disrupts their skin bacteria constantly. Obviously, this isn't true across the board, since factors like diet, clothing, and smoke exposure complicate things, but it's a legitimate scientific possibility that modern hygiene culture, in trying to eliminate smell, might paradoxically be creating different smell problems by constantly resetting the bacterial battlefield on our skin. Let's also talk about something people rarely consider: ancient perfume technology, because it's older than you'd think, and way more advanced. The earliest known perfumes date back roughly 4,000 years to Mesopotamia, where a chemist, and yes, that's literally her job title in the historical record, a woman named Taputi, distilled flowers, oils, and aromatic compounds using techniques that are honestly the ancestor of modern perfume distillation. Ancient Egyptians used scented oils made from frankincense, myrrh, and various floral extracts, not just for hygiene, but for religious rituals, status display, and yes, attracting romantic partners. Ancient Greeks and Romans had entire industries built around perfumed oils, with the wealthy practically bathing in scented olive oil concoctions. So the idea that ancient civilizations were just helplessly stinking through life with zero attempt at smelling nice is, frankly, kind of insulting to how creative and resourceful these people actually were. They didn't have spray can deodorant, sure, but they had a multi-thousand-year head start on perfumery. And some ancient perfumes were genuinely complex, layered, and prized enough to be traded across continents as luxury goods. Now, let's flip this around and ask, did ancient people even care about smelling bad the way we do? Because this is where modern assumptions can really mess up the picture. In many ancient and traditional societies, body odor wasn't treated as some unforgivable social crime. It was just a natural part of being a person who works, sweats, and lives outdoors. Compare that to today, where we've built an entire trillion-dollar global industry around eliminating, masking, and policing natural human scent. Deodorants, antiperspirants, scented detergents, air fresheners, perfumes, body sprays, marketed specifically toward teenagers who are terrified of smelling like a human being. That level of smell anxiety is, historically speaking, a pretty recent cultural phenomenon, heavily amplified by 20th century advertising that literally invented insecurities to sell products. Look up the history of how deodorant became mainstream, and you'll find advertising campaigns from the early 20th century that essentially manufactured social panic about body odor that didn't really exist at that scale before. Companies needed people to feel ashamed of a completely natural bodily function, so they'd buy a product to fix it. Ancient humans simply didn't have that particular brand of marketing induced shame baked into their culture. That said, let's not get too romantic about this and pretend ancient life was some fragrant utopia, because there are definitely some legitimately gross factors working against them too. Infrequent bathing in certain eras and regions, especially during colder seasons when water sources froze or bathing risked illness, would have led to real buildup of sweat, dirt, and skin cells over time. Parasites were a constant companion for much of human history. Lice and fleas were essentially universal experiences before modern pest control, and let's just say a flea-infested scalp isn't exactly contributing pleasant notes to your overall aroma. Dental hygiene was rough too. Without modern dentistry, tooth decay, gum disease, and rotting teeth were extremely common, and nothing tanks your breath quite like an untreated dental infection. So while body odor itself might be more nuanced and culturally relative than we assume, ancient humans absolutely had other smell-related issues working against them that had nothing to do with sweat and everything to do with the absence of modern medicine and dentistry. There's also the simple reality of population density and sanitation infrastructure, which matters a lot more than people realize. Ancient and medieval cities, especially as populations grew, often had genuinely serious sanitation problems. Waste disposal, sewage, animal husbandry happening right alongside human living quarters. Some ancient civilizations were remarkably advanced here. The aforementioned Indus Valley cities had sophisticated drainage systems. Ancient Rome built extensive sewer infrastructure, including the famous Cloaca Maxima. But plenty of other settlements, especially smaller or less centrally organized ones, had streets that functioned as open sewers, with waste, animal dung, and refuse just sort of accumulating. That's not really about individual body odor anymore, that's about the overall ambient smell of daily life in a pre-industrial city, which by most accounts would have hit a modern nose like a punch to the face. So the experience of walking through, say, a crowded medieval town wouldn't just be about whether the people around you personally smelled, it'd be about the entire environmental cocktail of smoke, waste, livestock, unrefrigerated food, and yes, also people. Let's also touch on something genuinely strange and kind of beautiful: scent and mate selection. There's a body of research suggesting that body odor has historically played, and may still play, a role in human attraction and mate choice, tied to genetic compatibility, specifically genes related to immune system diversity. The idea, sometimes called the major histocompatibility complex theory, suggests that humans may subconsciously find the scent of genetically dissimilar potential partners more attractive, because pairing with someone whose immune genes differ from yours produces offspring with a broader, more robust immune system. If this held true for ancient humans, and there's no particular reason it wouldn't since this is rooted in pretty ancient biology, then body odor wasn't just a hygiene issue to ancient people, it was potentially a subconscious biological signal involved in choosing a partner. In other words, what we now consider an embarrassing flaw to be masked with deodorant may have, for most of human history, been functioning as a genuinely useful evolutionary tool. Wild to think that the smell you're trying to cover up at the gym might be doing important behind-the-scenes biological work. So let's try to actually answer the question, because we've covered a lot of ground here. Did ancient humans smell bad? The honest answer is, it depends entirely on what you're comparing them to, and by whose standards. Compared to a modern human who showers daily with antibacterial soap, uses deodorant, washes machine-laundered clothes in detergent, and eats a varied global diet. Yes, ancient humans on average probably had a stronger, more noticeable natural body odor, especially layered with wood smoke, animal hide clothing, less frequent washing in certain eras, and diets that, depending on region, could be heavily meat-based. But compared to some idealized vision of cavemen as filthy, stinking brutes who never touched water, that picture falls apart completely. Many ancient cultures were deeply invested in bathing, oils, perfumes, and grooming, sometimes even more obsessively than modern people are. The variation across cultures, climates, eras, and diets is so enormous that there's no single ancient human smell to point to. A Mesopotamian perfumer's customer in 2000 BCE and a Siberian mammoth hunter from 20,000 years earlier would have had wildly different relationships with personal scent, despite both technically counting as ancient humans. And maybe the most interesting twist in all of this is realizing how much of our gut reaction, that instinctive, you, gross, ancient people definitely smelled terrible assumption, is really a reflection of our own modern conditioning rather than any objective truth. We've been trained by advertising, by germ theory taken to a cultural extreme, by an entire industry built on convincing us that the natural human body is something shameful that needs constant chemical correction. Step back from that conditioning, and body odor starts to look less like a moral failing and more like what it actually is: a complex chemical signal shaped by bacteria, diet, environment, and genetics that's been part of the human experience since before we were even fully human. Ancient people weren't disgusting failures at hygiene compared to us. They were operating within entirely different environmental constraints, cultural priorities, and biological realities, and in some specific ways, they may have actually had it figured out better than we give them credit for. So, next time you're standing in the shower deodorant aisle, staring at 40 different scent options promising to make you smell like a mysterious ocean breeze or whatever, just remember somewhere back in deep human history, someone was rubbing scented oil onto their skin using techniques that are, in spirit if not in branding, not all that different from what you're doing right now. The methods changed, the marketing definitely changed, but the basic human instinct to smell at least a little bit nice for the people around you, that's been with us for a very, very long time.